The silence after battle was never peace. It was permission. Permission for the real slaughter to begin. October 25th, 1415. The fields of Agincourt lay beneath a sky the color of old iron. 10,000 men had woken that morning with beating hearts and breathing lungs. By noon, most of them would be meat cooling in the mud. But this is not a story about the battle itself. History has told that story 1,000 times, polished it until it gleams like the armor in museum cases. This is about what happened when the glory ended and the real work began. This is about three men who refused to let war kill what was best in them. Dawn came reluctant and cold. In the English camp, men moved like shadows between dying fires, their breath making ghosts in the air. Some prayed, some sharpened blades already sharp enough to split hairs. Some stared at nothing, seeing futures they would never reach. Sir Edmund Hartley stood outside his tent, 58 years old, and feeling every winter of it in his bones. Stones. His hair had gone the color of steel wool. His hands, scarred from 4 decades of war, worked methodically at the straps of his breastplate. The metal was dented in 3 places, souvenirs from battles he could barely remember. Rosebecki, Aljubarrota, a dozen nameless skirmishes in the mud of France. He had been 10 years old when he first saw war, a page at the Battle of Najera, hiding behind the supply wagons while men screamed and died. He had been 25 when he learned what it meant to kill a man who begged for his life. He was 58 now, and he had thought himself beyond surprise. War had shown him its every face, or so he believed. "Father," the voice came soft, but it made Edmund turn. Richard stood 3 paces away, 22 years old, and trying very hard not to look afraid. His armor fit him better than it had any right to commission just 6 months ago when King Henry had called his banners. The metal gleamed. It had never stopped a real blow. Richard's hands worked at the buckles of his sword belt, fumbling slightly. Edmund recognized that fumble. He had done the same thing at Rosebeck 33 years ago. "Can't get it tight enough," Richard said, managing a smile that did not reach his eyes. "My hands won't stop shaking." Edmund crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. His fingers, steady despite their scars, worked the buckle with practiced efficiency. "Your hands shake because your body is wise," he said quietly. "Fear is not your enemy, Richard. Fear is what keeps you sharp. It is what keeps you alive. Did you feel it before your first battle?" Edmund's hands paused for just a moment. "I was so terrified I pissed myself before we even formed lines. I was 25 years old and I stood in my own urine for 3 hours while we waited for the French to charge." Richard's eyes widened. "You never told me that." "Because I was ashamed. For years I thought it meant I was weak." Edmund finished with the buckle and placed both hands on his son's shoulders. "Then I learned that every man who tells you he felt no fear is either a liar or a fool, and fools die quickly." Richard nodded, some of the tension leaving his frame. "What if I fail you today? You cannot fail me by being afraid. You can only fail me by forgetting what I taught you." Edmund reached to his hand where a signet ring caught the weak morning light. He had worn it for 40 years, since the day his father had placed it on his finger and called him a knight. The engraving was worn almost smooth now, a heart, the symbol of their house, leaping over a fence. "Do you remember the oath?" Edmund asked. Richard's voice came steady now, reciting words he had learned as a boy. "Protect the weak. Show mercy to defeated foes. Fight with honor even when honor is not returned." "Especially when honor is not returned," Edmund corrected gently. "Any man can be noble when nobility costs nothing. The true test comes when keeping your oath might cost you everything." Across the camp a horn blew. The sound cut through the dawn like a blade through silk. Men began moving toward the assembly points, a tide of steel and cloth flowing toward the French lines visible in the distance. Richard's hand found the pommel of his sword. "What if I am too afraid to act? What if I freeze?" Edmund pulled his son close, armor scraping against armor. "Then you freeze, and then you unfreeze, and then you do what must be done. Fear does not make you weak, Richard. It makes you human. What you do despite that fear, that is what makes you a knight." They stood like that for a moment, father and son, while around them 10,000 men prepared to kill or die for a king's ambition. Then Edmund released him and stepped back. "Stay close to the banners," he said. "Watch the men around you. If the line breaks, do not try to be a hero, just survive. That is all I ask." Richard nodded. He opened his mouth to say something else, then closed it. Some words were too heavy to speak aloud. Instead, he turned and joined the flow of men moving toward the field. Edmund watched him go, memorizing the way his son walked the set of his shoulders, the way sunlight caught on the edges of his helmet. A terrible certainty settled in his chest. This would not be like the songs. This would not be glorious. But he did not know, not yet, just how far from glory it would fall. The battle itself lasted 4 hours. In those 4 hours, the world contracted to the width of a shield, the length of a sword arm, the space between one breath and the next. Edmund fought in the center line, his legs screaming where an old wound had never quite healed right. He killed 3 men, maybe 4. It was hard to count in the crush. He saw Richard twice. Once his son was standing in the press of bodies, his sword bloody, his face set in an expression Edmund had never seen before. Determination mixed with horror. The second time, Richard was helping pull a wounded English soldier back from the front rank, showing more courage in that act of mercy than in any killing stroke. Pride and terror warred in Edmund's chest. Then came the moment every soldier dreads and every commander prays for. Somewhere on the French left flank, something broke. Maybe a man stumbled. Maybe a wedge of English infantry punched through at just the right angle. Maybe someone started a rumor that their cavalry had been routed. It did not matter what caused it. The French lines shattered like glass under a hammer. What followed was not battle, it was butchery. Edmund stood in the mudblood running down his leg where a French blade had opened a gash above his knee and watched the transformation. One moment there had been 2 armies locked in desperate struggle. The next there were hunters and prey. English cavalry held in reserve for exactly this moment exploded forward. Light horsemen on fast mounts, their job brutally simple. Run down every man who fled. Kill them in the open field where they could not form up and fight back. Turn victory into annihilation. Edmund saw Richard in the surge swept up in the pursuit. His son's face was alive with something Edmund recognized and hated. The intoxication of victory. The terrible joy of being alive when so many were dead. "No," Edmund whispered, but his voice was lost in the roar. He tried to follow, but his leg gave out on the 3rd step. He went down hard hands, catching himself in mud, mixed with things he did not want to identify. By the time he regained his feet, Richard was a distant figure on horseback, chasing French soldiers who threw down their weapons and ran for their lives. Captain Blackwood thundered past his horse's hooves, throwing up chunks of earth. He saw Edmund and reined in for just a moment. "Hartley, your boy fights well. He is running them down like a proper knight." Then he was gone, and Edmund was alone with his dread. The pursuit went on for 3 miles. Edmund learned this later from men who participated and men who survived. 3 miles of systematic slaughter. French soldiers who had fought bravely in the line were cut down from behind as they ran. Boys who had never wanted to be soldiers were trampled under hooves. Men who tried to surrender were killed anyway because stopping to take prisoners would slow the chase. It was efficient. It was doctrine. It was murder dressed in the colors of war. When Richard returned an hour later, his sword was red to the hilt. He rode past Edmund without seeming to see him, his eyes focused on something in the distance, or perhaps on nothing at all. Edmund called his name. Richard did not respond. The killing ground stretched in every direction, now a landscape of the dead and dying. English soldiers moved among the fallen, checking bodies, finishing wounded enemies, looking for anything valuable enough to claim. The work was methodical, professional. Edmund had seen it before at Rosebecki or at Aljubarrota at a dozen smaller fights. The aftermath always looked the same, but he had never had to explain it to his son before. Edmund found Richard an hour later standing beside his horse staring at his hands. The sword lay on the ground beside him. He had tried to clean it, but blood had dried in the fuller, in the crossguard, in the wire wrapping of the grip. Richard, his son did not look up. There was a boy, French, maybe 16. He threw down his spear and ran. I chased him. Richard's voice was flat, empty of inflection. I caught him at the edge of the tree line. He fell. He was crying. He put up his hands and said something in French. I think he was begging. Edmund's chest tightened. He knew what came next. Captain Blackwood rode up beside me. He said, "Finish him or I will." He said, "We cannot leave enemies behind to reform and attack us again." He said it was doctrine. Richard finally looked at Edmund, and his eyes were the eyes of a man twice his age. So I did nothing, and Blackwood put his lance through the boy's chest. And the boy died looking at me, asking me why. The silence between them was a physical thing heavy as stone. Father, you taught me to show mercy to defeated foes. You taught me that honor matters even in war. You taught me that we are better than animals because we can choose to be merciful. Richard's voice cracked. Where was the mercy? Where was the honor? That boy was defeated. He had surrendered. And we killed him anyway. Edmund wanted to say something wise, something that would make sense of it, something that would return the certainty to his son's eyes. But the words would not come, because Richard was right. There had been no mercy. There had been no honor. There had only been the logic of war, cold and brutal and undeniable. I do not know, Edmund said finally, and the admission felt like pulling out his own teeth. I do not know where the honor was. Richard turned away. Then what was the point of everything you taught me? Edmund had no answer. In 58 years of war, he had never felt more like a failure. The sun was setting now, painting the battlefield in shades of copper and rust. Shadows lengthened across the dead, and in those shadows, movement began. Not from the fallen, but from the edges of the killing ground. People emerging from tree lines and distant farms drawn by the terrible gravity of what had happened here. Edmund saw them and felt a new kind of dread. The carrion eaters were coming, but first came the mercy. Father William appeared like a ghost materializing from smoke. One moment the field was empty, save for corpses. The next he was there kneeling beside a French soldier whose leg had been severed at the knee. The priest's hands moved with practiced efficiency, tying a tourniquet, offering water from a skin, murmuring prayers in Latin. Edmund had known William for 33 years, since Rosabiki, since the day William had dragged him from beneath a dead horse and probably saved his life. Back then, William had been a warrior like any other, young and strong and certain of his righteousness. Then had come the siege of Limoges in 1370, where English soldiers had massacred 3,000 civilians in the name of putting down rebellion. William had been there. William had seen what men could do when all restraint was removed. 6 months later, he had laid down his sword and taken vows. Now he was 68 years old, his back bent, his hair white as winter clouds, but his eyes were still the eyes Edmund remembered, clear and uncompromising. Edmund, William said without looking up from his patient, you are wounded. It is nothing. Your leg is bleeding through your breeches. Sit down before you fall down. William finished with the tourniquet and moved to the next body. This one was already dead. He made the sign of the cross anyway. Edmund limped over and lowered himself to the ground with a grunt. You should not be out here alone, William. There are still armed men on this field. Then I suppose I should pray they remember their catechism. William moved to another body, French young, a wound in his side that would kill him slowly. The priest produced a small blade from his robes, thin and needle-sharp, a mercy blade. Edmund looked away. You cannot watch, William asked quietly. I have watched enough for one lifetime. Then you understand why I cannot stop. The priest positioned the blade carefully, finding the gap in the young soldier's armor at the base of the skull. Close your eyes, boy. God will be gentle. A single thrust, a shudder, then stillness. William cleaned the blade on the dead man's surcoat and moved to the next. Edmund forced himself to watch this time, to bear witness. The priest repeated the process, efficient and terrible and kind. After the third, Edmund spoke. Is it truly mercy, William, or is it simply convenient? The priest paused, his blade hovering above a French knight whose breathing came in wet, rattling gasps. What do you mean, William? I mean, would we offer this mercy if we had the resources to save them? If we had surgeons and supplies and time? Or do we kill them because keeping them alive would be expensive and difficult and risky? William's hand did not waver. Both things can be true, Edmund. It can be mercy and convenience at the same time. That does not make it less necessary. It makes it less noble. I stopped caring about nobility 30 years ago. I care about reducing suffering. If that is not noble enough for you, then I am sorry. William made the thrust. Another life ended. Another soul sent to whatever judgment awaited. Edmund watched 5 more mercy killings before he spoke again. My son saw things today. Things I cannot explain to him. Things that break the code I taught him. What code? Honor, mercy, protecting the defeated. William sat back on his heels and finally looked at Edmund fully. And you think war ever truly had room for those things, or did you just teach him a beautiful lie to make the killing easier to bear? The words hit harder than any blade. It was not a lie. Was it not? William gestured to the field around them. Look, Edmund, look at what victory actually is. Thousands dead, thousands more dying slowly. Men who surrendered killed anyway because they were inconvenient. And now, because we cannot care for the enemy wounded, and because they might somehow recover and fight us again, we walk among them with knives and end them like putting down lame horses. You are the one doing the ending. Yes, because someone must. Because leaving them to die over hours or days in agony serves no purpose except to make us feel less guilty about our unwillingness to help them. William's voice was not angry. It was tired, infinitely tired. I am a priest, Edmund. I have dedicated my life to God, and God has seen fit to make my primary duty the efficient killing of helpless men. If you can explain the honor in that, I would very much like to hear it. Edmund had no answer. William stood, his knees cracking. Where is Richard now? I do not know. He rode in the pursuit. He came back changed. They all do. William looked across the darkening field. The first killing is always the hardest. Not the first in battle, the first that feels like murder. That is the one that breaks something inside. How do I help him? You do not. You cannot unbreak what war has broken. You can only stand beside him while he learns to live with the pieces. William picked up his bag. I have 200 more men to see to before full dark. Most will be dead by morning anyway, but I will sit with them regardless. That is the only mercy I have left to give. Presence in the dying. He walked away, and Edmund sat alone among the dead, feeling the weight of 58 years and 4 decades of war pressing down on his shoulders like an iron yoke. He had taught his son a code. Protect the weak. Show mercy to the defeated. Fight with honor. Beautiful words. Noble words. And every single one of them had been a lie. Night fell on Agincourt, and with the darkness came the second wave. If the sweepers with their mercy blades were the angels of death, then the looters were the carrion birds. They came in groups, some from the English camp, some from nearby villages, some professional scavengers who followed armies the way sharks followed ships. They brought knives and sacks and carts. They brought the brutal practicality of people who understood that the dead had no use for their possessions. Edmund watched them work from where he sat, too tired and too heartsick to move. They stripped corpses with the efficiency of men gutting fish. Armor came off first, the valuable steel that could be sold or melted down. Then weapons, then clothing, then anything else of value. Rings, teeth, sometimes just boots if the leather was good. The bodies they left behind were naked and pale, sprawled in undignified positions, robbed of even the dignity of burial shrouds. This too was doctrine. This too was expected. The dead were resources now, nothing more. Edmund saw Richard in the torchlight, standing at the edge of a group of English soldiers who were working over a pile of French dead. His son was not participating, but he was not stopping them either. He just stood there, watching, his face unreadable. A woman moved through the field with the confidence of long practice. She was perhaps 35, wearing the sturdy clothes of a camp follower, her hands already stained dark. She stopped beside a French knight, checked for signs of life with professional efficiency, then began working at the buckles of his breastplate. Edmund knew her type. The wars were full of women like her. Washerwomen, cooks, sutlers, prostitutes, all the people who kept an army fed and clothed and serviced. Most were poor. Most were desperate. Most did what they had to do to survive. This one was faster than most. She had the breastplate off in under a minute, the chain shirt in 2. She was reaching for the man's boots when his hand moved. Not dead. Just unconscious. The woman froze. For a long moment, she and the French knight stared at each other. He was young, maybe 25, with a wound in his side that was probably mortal, but had not killed him yet. His lips moved, forming words in French, a question maybe, or a plea. Edmund watched, unable to look away. The woman sat back on her heels. She looked at the knife in her belt, then at the man, then at the armor she had already removed. She made her choice. She stood, picked up the breastplate and chain shirt, and walked away. She did not kill him, but she did not help him either. She just took what she needed and left him there to die slowly in the mud. Edmund understood the logic. Helping him would be dangerous. Keeping him alive would consume resources. Mercy was a luxury for people who could afford it, but understanding did not make it easier to witness. Richard had seen it too. Edmund watched his son's face crumple, watched him turn away and retch into the grass. When he straightened, his face was set in new lines, harder and older. Edmund tried to stand to go to him, but his leg would not bear his weight. He fell back to the ground with a curse. By the time he managed to haul himself up using a broken spear as a crutch, Richard was gone. The night deepened. The looters continued their work. And somewhere in the darkness, Father William moved from body to body, offering the only mercy anyone seemed capable of giving: a quick blade and a prayer. Edmund finally found Richard 2 hours later, sitting beside a dying fire at the edge of the English camp. His son was not alone. A sergeant sat across from him, a grizzled veteran of perhaps 35, sharing a wineskin. "Your father taught you well," the sergeant was saying as Edmund approached. "Saw you in the line. You kept your head. That is rarer than you think." "I killed 3 men," Richard said, his voice hollow. "Then 3 French mothers will weep. That is war, boy. You did your duty." "One of them was running away," the sergeant shrugged. "Running men are still dangerous men. They can regroup. They can fight again tomorrow. Better to end it when you have the chance." He took a pull from the wineskin and offered it to Richard. "You will get used to it. The first day is always hard. By the 3rd campaign, you will not even remember their faces." Edmund stepped into the firelight. "That is enough, Sergeant." The man looked up, saw Edmund's rank, and stood quickly. "Sir Edmund, did not see you there. Leave us." The sergeant nodded and melted into the darkness. Richard did not look up. Edmund lowered himself to the ground beside his son, his leg throbbing. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Richard spoke. "Is he right? Will I stop remembering their faces?" "Some men do. Will I?" Edmund looked at his son, really looked at him. Richard's hands were shaking slightly. His jaw was clenched. His eyes were fixed on the fire as if it held answers. "No," Edmund said quietly. "I do not think you will. I think you are cursed as I am cursed to remember every face, every name if you learned it, every moment when you could have chosen differently." "Then how do you bear it?" "Some days I do not." Edmund stared into the flames. "Some days I wake up and I am back at Rosbeck watching a man I killed beg for his life. Some days I am at Aljubarrota stepping over boys barely old enough to hold a spear. The faces do not fade, Richard. They accumulate. That is the price." "Then why do we do it? Why do we fight at all if it costs so much?" Edmund had been asking himself that question for 40 years. Because kings command it. Because we swore oaths. Because if we do not, someone else will, and they may be worse than us. Because sometimes there are things worth protecting, even if the protection costs us pieces of our souls. He paused. "And sometimes we do it simply because we do not know how to do anything else." Richard finally looked at him. "I do not want to become the kind of man who does not remember faces." "Then do not. Hold on to every face. Let them haunt you. Let them remind you that every death matters, even when everyone around you is saying it does not." Edmund reached out and gripped his son's shoulder. "The sergeant is wrong. Getting used to killing is not strength. It is surrender. Stay haunted, Richard. Stay human." His son's eyes filled with tears. "I do not know if I can." "Neither do I, but we are going to try." Edmund pulled Richard against him, and his son broke sobbing like he had not done since childhood. Edmund held him while the fire burned low and the night deepened, and somewhere in the darkness, Father William continued his terrible ministry. When Richard finally pulled away, his face was raw but calmer. "What happens now?" "Now we survive the aftermath, because the battle is over, but the war with ourselves is just beginning." Edmund did not know how right he was. Morning came gray and cold. The field of Agincourt looked different in daylight. Worse, the darkness had hidden some of the details. The sun revealed everything. 10,000 dead, maybe more. Bodies sprawled in clusters where the fighting had been thickest. Bodies scattered alone where men had tried to run and been cut down. Bodies in the stream turning the water pink. Bodies in the tree line. Bodies everywhere already starting to bloat in the October chill. And among them the wounded. Hundreds of them. Maybe 1,000. French soldiers who had survived the battle only to lie helpless on the ground waiting for help that would not come or death that was taking its time. King Henry gave the order at dawn: clear the field, bury the dead, finish the wounded. The army was moving to Calais within 2 days, and a battlefield full of rotting corpses and dying enemies was unacceptable. Captain Blackwood assembled the details. Edmund found himself assigned to burial coordination despite his wounded leg, or perhaps because of it. Men who could not march could still give orders. Richard volunteered for the sweeper teams. Edmund tried to stop him. "You do not have to do this." "Yes, I do." Richard's face was set determined. "You said to stay human. You said to remember faces. I cannot do that if I hide from what we have done. This is different than battle. This is executing helpless men. I know, that is why I have to see it. If I am going to carry these deaths, I need to understand what they cost." Richard picked up the mercy blade a sergeant handed him. The weapon was simple, elegant, terrible. A foot of narrow steel, sharp as a whisper, designed for one purpose only. Edmund watched his son walk toward the field and felt something in his chest tear. The sweeper teams worked in groups of 4, moving methodically across the killing ground. Their job was brutally simple. Check each body for signs of life. If English, check for rank and wealth. If valuable, mark for ransom processing. If common, offer basic aid if possible, otherwise move on. If French, check for wealth. If valuable, mark for ransom. If common, use the blade. Edmund watched from a distance as Richard joined his team. The sergeant from the night before was there along with 2 other veterans. They showed Richard the technique: how to check for breathing without getting close enough to be grabbed, how to identify valuable prisoners by their armor and heraldry, how to make the killing stroke quick and certain. Then they set him loose. The first man Richard approached was French Young, with a belly wound that had his guts spilling into his hands. The soldier saw Richard coming and spoke in rapid French, the words tumbling over each other. Richard did not understand the language, but the tone was clear. Begging. Richard knelt beside him. The sergeant called out, "Check for rings, purses, anything valuable. Then finish him. That wound is mortal anyway." Richard searched the man's hands, his belt. Nothing. The soldier grabbed Richard's wrist, still pleading. His grip was weak. Edmund saw his son's face from 50 yards away, saw the moment of decision, saw Richard position the blade at the base of the man's skull, finding the gap where spine met brain, saw the thrust, saw his son become an executioner. Richard stood quickly, turned away, vomited. The sergeant clapped him on the shoulder. "First one is worst. Gets easier. Next." It did not get easier. Edmund watched his son kill 6 more men that morning. Some were unconscious, some begged. One sang delirious with fever, one prayed, one cursed. Richard killed them all with the same mechanical efficiency the sergeant had taught him. After the 7th, Richard sat down in the mud and would not stand up. The sergeant tried to pull him to his feet. Richard shook him off. "I need a moment. We have 200 more to check before noon, no time for moments." "I said I need a moment." Richard's voice was flat, empty. The sergeant looked at Edmund, who had limped closer. Edmund nodded. The sergeant shrugged and moved on with the rest of the team. Edmund sat beside his son in the mud, heedless of his ruined breeches and wounded leg. They sat among the dead and dying, and for a long time neither spoke. Finally, Richard whispered, "One of them looked like you." Edmund said nothing. Same age, same build, same expression. He was calling for his son, over and over, calling for a boy who was probably already dead somewhere on this field. Richard's hands were shaking, and I put a knife in his brain. "Did you have a choice?" The sergeant said the wound was mortal. Said he would be dead by sunset anyway. Said this was kindness. Richard turned to look at Edmund. But what if he was wrong? What if that man could have lived? What if his son was alive somewhere and could have found him and gotten him help and brought him home? What if I just murdered a man who could have been saved? You are asking questions that have no answers. No, I am asking questions that have uncomfortable answers. Richard's voice was stronger now, edged with something sharp. The truth is, we do not know if he could have been saved. We do not care to find out, because saving him would be expensive and difficult, and he is French. So we call it mercy, and we call it kindness, and we sleep better at night. Edmund wanted to argue, wanted to defend the practice, wanted to explain the logic that made it necessary. But the words stuck in his throat because everything Richard said was true. Father William said something to me last night, Edmund said instead. He said that mercy and convenience can both be true at the same time, that something can be kind and cruel simultaneously. I think he is right. I think we are doing a terrible thing for compassionate reasons, and I think that makes us monsters, but monsters who weep for what we do. Richard looked at him. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No, it is supposed to make you understand that war does not allow for clean choices, only messy ones. You can refuse to make them, but then someone else will make them for you and they might not weep afterward. So I should keep killing helpless men, because at least I feel bad about it. Yes, Edmund met his son's eyes, because the day you stop feeling bad is the day you become the thing we are fighting against. Stay broken, Richard. Stay human. They sat in silence after that, two broken men in a field of the dead, while around them the work of war continued. By noon, the sweepers had cleared the area closest to the English lines. 300 French dead confirmed, another 100 marked for ransom, wounded but valuable. And among the dead, items of value began to accumulate. The looters came in waves now, no longer furtive but bold in daylight. They picked through the naked corpses like scavengers at a feast, and the soldiers let them, because everyone understood the economy of war. The crown could not pay wages. The soldiers would pay themselves. Edmund watched a group of English men-at-arms arguing over a French knight's armor. The breastplate was Italian work worth more than any of them would earn in 5 years. They nearly came to blows before a sergeant intervened and divided the spoils. Nearby, the camp followers worked in teams. The woman from the night before was there, efficient and focused. She had acquired a cart and was loading it with boots, belts, mail shirts, anything that could be sold in Calais. She worked alongside a younger woman, perhaps her daughter, teaching her the trade. Check the seams, she was saying. Nobles hide coins in the hems of their surcoats. Check the boots, too. Gold is heavy. They do not run far carrying it. The girl, perhaps 16, pulled a ring from a dead man's finger. The finger came with it, already stiff. She dropped both with a cry of disgust. The older woman picked up the ring, wiped it on her skirt, pocketed it. Squeamishness costs money. Do it again. Edmund looked away. Richard appeared beside him, his hands and sleeves dark with blood. The sergeant wants you. They found someone. Someone valuable. Someone alive who should not be. Edmund followed Richard to a cluster of soldiers standing around a supply tent. Inside, hidden beneath a tarp, lay a French boy of perhaps 17. He had a broken leg splinted with pieces of spear shaft and strips of cloth. He was conscious, terrified, and absolutely silent. Father William knelt beside him, one hand on the boy's shoulder. William, what is this? Edmund asked. This is Henri. He is 17 years old. He is from a village near Rouen. His father was conscripted, and he came along as a page. His father is dead. His leg is broken, but will heal if given time. William looked up at Edmund. The sweepers were going to kill him. Captain Blackwood stood in the tent entrance, arms crossed. He is French. He is wounded. He is of no value for ransom. Doctrine says he is to be dispatched. Doctrine is not scripture, William said quietly. In war, it is close enough. Blackwood turned to Edmund. Hartley, you are in command of burial detail. This is your decision. Do we waste resources keeping a worthless prisoner alive, or do we follow orders and clear the field? Edmund looked at the boy. Henri stared back, uncomprehending, but clearly aware his life hung in balance. He could not have been more than a year younger than Richard. He is a boy, Edmund said. He is an enemy combatant. He is 17 years old with a broken leg. And tomorrow, when that leg heals, he will pick up a spear, and kill English soldiers. Or do you think the French will simply let him go home to his village? Blackwood's voice was not cruel, just pragmatic. We are not running a charity, Hartley. We are running a war. William stood. Then run it without my cooperation. I am staying with this boy. If you want him dead, you will have to kill me too. The tent went silent. Blackwood stared at the old priest, calculating. Edmund could see the thoughts moving behind his eyes. William was beloved by the men. Killing him would cause problems. But allowing him to defy orders would cause different problems. Finally, Blackwood nodded. Fine. The priest and the French boy stay here. But they are your responsibility, Hartley. You feed them from your own rations. You guard them with your own men. And if that boy so much as looks at an Englishman wrong, I am holding you accountable." He turned and left. The soldiers filtered out after him, leaving Edmund, Richard, William, and Henry alone in the tent. The boy spoke for the first time, his voice barely a whisper. "Merci." William patted his shoulder. "Save your thanks for Edmund. He is the one who did not kill you." "I did not save him," Edmund said. "I just delayed his execution." "Then the delay will have to be enough." William began checking Henry's splint. "I will need bandages, clean water, bread if you can spare it." Edmund looked at Richard. His son was staring at Henry with an expression Edmund could not read. "Richard, can you get those things?" Richard nodded slowly. "Father, can I ask you something?" "Of course. That man this morning, the one who looked like you, the one calling for his son, could we have saved him?" Edmund did not answer immediately. "I do not know. But we did not try. We just killed him." Richard's voice was not accusing, just stating fact. "And now we are saving this boy. What is the difference?" "The difference is that Father William was here to make me see him as a person instead of a problem. So whether someone lives or dies depends on whether a priest is standing nearby." "Sometimes, yes." Edmund met his son's eyes. "War is not just Richard. It is not fair. It is not logical. It is a series of moments where we make choices based on who is watching and what we can bear to live with afterward." Richard absorbed this. Then he nodded and left to find supplies. William worked on Henri's splint while Edmund watched. After a moment, the priest spoke without looking up. "You are wondering if this matters. Does it? He is alive. For now, that is enough." William finished his work and sat back. "I have been doing this for 45 years, Edmund, since I left the sword and took the cross. I have saved perhaps 1,000 lives in that time. It is nothing against the tens of thousands I have blessed as they died. But it is not nothing. The sergeant was right, you know. When Henri's leg heals, they will put a spear in his hand and send him against us again. Probably, and maybe he will kill an English soldier. Maybe he will kill your son." William finally looked up. "But that is tomorrow's sin. Today I am keeping a boy alive. I will worry about tomorrow when it comes." Edmund wanted to argue, but his leg was throbbing and his head ached, and he was so tired. Tired of war, tired of death, tired of making choices that had no good answers. "I am going to check the burial details," he said finally. "Call if you need anything." He limped out of the tent and into the afternoon sun. The field stretched before him, and the work continued. Sweepers with their mercy blades, looters with their carts and sacks, soldiers arguing over spoils, and everywhere the dead naked and pale, waiting for the ground to swallow them. This was victory, Edmund thought. This was what winning looked like. He had never felt more like a failure. The afternoon brought new horrors dressed in familiar clothes. Edmund was supervising the digging of burial pits when the prisoner train arrived. 30 French nobles and knights, the valuable ones, the men worth more alive than dead. They had been collected throughout the day, sorted by heralds who checked their heraldry and estimated their ransoms. Captain Blackwood led the group, mounted and proud. At his side, bound but walking, was a man Edmund recognized, Count Bernard de Valois. They had fought against each other 30 years ago at Aljubarrota. Bernard had been 22 then, a newly minted knight, idealistic and brave. Edmund had been 28, already hardened by war, but not yet broken by it. They had crossed swords 3 times during that battle. Neither had managed to kill the other. Afterward, during the peace talks, they had shared wine and discovered they had more in common than either expected. Both were second sons. Both had been forced into military service by family obligation. Both secretly hated the politics that drove men to kill each other over lines on maps. They had promised drunkenly to look each other up if they ever met again in peacetime. This was not peacetime. Bernard's armor was gone, stripped by looters. He wore only a torn and bloodied shirt, his hands bound in front of him. His left leg dragged, clearly broken or badly wounded. He was 52 years old now, his hair shot through with gray, his face lined with pain. But his eyes were the same, clear and intelligent and utterly unafraid. Those eyes met Edmund's and recognition flared. "Hartley," Bernard said in accented English. "Mon Dieu, we are old men now." Edmund felt something twist in his chest. "Bernard, I had hoped you were not here." I had hoped the same of you. It seems we are both unlucky. Bernard managed a pained smile. Though I suppose I am unluckier. You are standing and I am bound. Blackwood dismounted. You know this man Hartley. We have met long ago. Good. Then you can handle his ransom negotiation. I have 29 others to process. Blackwood handed Edmund a scroll. Standard terms, 3,000 livres payable to the crown. He has 30 days to contact his family. If they cannot pay, he will be held until they can or sold to someone who will pay less. Your responsibility. Edmund took the scroll, his hands numb. 3,000 livres, a fortune, enough to beggar most noble families. Bernard's family was wealthy but not that wealthy. Blackwood left, taking the other prisoners with him. Edmund and Bernard stood alone in the mud, an old friendship resurrected in the worst possible circumstances. Can your family raise 3,000 livres? Edmund asked quietly. Bernard laughed bitter. If they sell everything, the estates, the holdings, everything my family has built for 200 years, then yes, they can pay. I am sorry. Why you won your battle, I lost mine. That is war. Bernard's leg gave out and he stumbled. Edmund caught him, eased him to the ground. Thank you. The leg is broken. I felt it snap when my horse fell. I will get you a surgeon. Will you or will you get me a man with a knife who will cut it off because you do not have the resources to set it properly? Bernard's voice was not accusing, just tired. I have been a soldier for 30 years, Edmund. I know how this works. Edmund had no answer because Bernard was right. Richard appeared with a water skin and a blanket. He stopped when he saw Bernard, recognition flickering across his face. Father, is this? Count Bernard de Valois, an old friend. Bernard, my son Richard. Bernard studied Richard with the eyes of a man who had spent decades evaluating warriors. He has your build, your eyes. Does he have your honor? I am trying to teach him. Good. The world needs men with honor, even if it does not reward them for it. Bernard accepted the water skin from Richard with a nod of thanks. He drank deeply, then passed it back. How did you find yourself here, boy? My father serves King Henry, so I serve King Henry. And do you believe in this war? Richard hesitated. Edmund could see him considering a political answer, then discarding it for the truth. No, my lord, I do not believe in any war. Smart boy. It took me 15 years to learn what you already know. Bernard shifted, wincing as his broken leg moved. Your father taught you to fight with honor. He tried. And what did you learn today after your first real battle? Richard's face hardened. I learned that honor is a story we tell ourselves to make the killing bearable. Bernard looked at Edmund. You have raised a realist. I am not sure if I should congratulate you or offer my condolences. I am not sure either, Edmund said. Captain Blackwood returned with 2 soldiers. Hartley, we have a situation. The prisoner holding area is full. I need you to house the overflow. That includes your French friend. House them where? I do not care. The supply tents, the latrines, your own tent if you have to. Just keep them secured until we can transport them to Calais. Blackwood did not wait for an answer. He simply left. Edmund looked at Bernard. It seems you are my responsibility now. Lucky me. At least you will probably not beat me. Bernard tried to stand and failed, though a beating might be preferable to wherever you are planning to put me. Between Edmund and Richard, they managed to get Bernard to the supply tent where Henry lay hidden. The French boy saw Bernard and spoke rapidly in French. Bernard responded, his tone gentle. The boy visibly relaxed. What did you tell him? Edmund asked. That he was safe. That you were a man of honor who would not kill children. Bernard lowered himself to the ground with a groan. I hope I was not lying. You were not. Good. I would hate to have to haunt you when the boy's ghost inevitably comes for revenge. Father William entered the tent, saw Bernard, and his face lit up with surprised joy. Bernard de Valois, I thought you were dead. William, you old bastard. Bernard's laughter was genuine despite his pain. They told me you had taken holy orders. I did not believe it. Believe it. I have been wearing this collar for 40 years. William knelt beside Bernard, examining his leg with practiced hands. This is broken badly. The bone may be shattered. I know. We need to set it properly or you will lose the leg. With what equipment? What supplies? Bernard's voice was gentle. We both know what happens to wounded prisoners in the field, William. Do not pretend otherwise. William's face hardened. I will not let you lose this leg. I do not care what it costs. Edmund left them talking and pulled Richard outside. His son's face was troubled. That man in there, Richard said quietly. Bernard, he seems like a good man. He is, and we are holding him for ransom. We are going to take everything his family owns and leave them destitute, because he lost a battle. Richard's voice was not accusatory, just tired. How is that different from what the looters are doing to the dead? It is not different. It is just more expensive. Then what are we? What does that make us? Edmund had been asking himself that question since dawn. Survivors. That is all anyone is in war. Survivors who make choices we can live with and try not to think too hard about the ones we cannot. Richard shook his head. I do not think I can live with this. You will, because the alternative is to break completely, and I will not let you do that. Edmund gripped his son's shoulder. Stay angry. Stay troubled. Stay awake to the horror of what we are doing. The moment you accept it as normal is the moment you lose the best part of yourself. A commotion across the camp drew their attention. Soldiers were gathering around something, voices raised in alarm. Edmund and Richard moved closer. A man had collapsed, one of the English soldiers. He was convulsing foam at his lips, his skin gray. As they watched, he vomited, and the smell hit them like a physical blow. Sweet, rotten, wrong. Plague, someone whispered. The word spread like fire through dry grass. Men backed away from the fallen soldier. A surgeon pushed through, took one look, and shook his head. Not plague, flux, dysentery. From the water. The water, someone else asked. The surgeon pointed toward the stream that ran through the battlefield. You have been drinking from that. Several men nodded. Then you are fools. That stream has run through a field of 10,000 rotting corpses for 2 days. Every drop is poison. Silence fell, then panic. Men began checking themselves for symptoms. Some claimed to feel sick already. Others ran to empty their water skins. The surgeon tried to calm them, but fear had taken hold. Edmund felt the ground shift beneath him, metaphorically if not literally. They had won the battle. They had slaughtered the French. They had cleared the field. And now the field was killing them back. Father William appeared beside him, his face grim. It has begun. What has the real cost? The battle killed 10,000 French. The aftermath will kill just as many English if we are not careful. William looked across the camp where more soldiers were reporting sick. We need to move the army, now, before this spreads. But King Henry's orders had been clear. Clear the field, bury the dead, prepare for the march to Calais. That would take 2 more days minimum. 2 days of drinking poisoned water. 2 days of breathing air thick with rot. 2 days of sleeping on ground soaked with death. Edmund looked at Richard. Get your things. We are leaving. Father, we cannot just... We are leaving. Tonight. I do not care about orders. I will not watch you die because some king thinks clearing a battlefield is more important than protecting his own men. But even as he said it, Edmund knew they could not leave. Desertion meant execution, and more than that, there were people depending on them. Bernard, Henri, Father William. They were trapped by duty and honor, and the same code Edmond had spent Richard's whole life teaching him to uphold. The irony was not lost on him. As night fell on the second day after Agincourt, Edmund sat outside the supply tent and watched the camp descend into quiet chaos. More men were falling sick. The surgeons were overwhelmed. Fresh water was being rationed now, brought from a stream 3 miles away, but the damage was done. Father William emerged from the tent, exhausted. Bernard's fever is worse. The leg is infected. I have done everything I can, but without proper equipment, proper medicines. He trailed off. Will he live? I do not know. His will is strong, but will is not always enough. They sat in silence, 2 old men who had seen too much while around them, an army that had won a great victory, slowly poisoned itself on its own triumph. Somewhere in the darkness, a man screamed. Disease or nightmare, Edmund could not tell. Perhaps there was no difference anymore. Richard joined them, bringing bread and cheese he had scavenged from somewhere. They ate without speaking, too tired for conversation. Finally, Richard spoke. Father William, can I ask you something? Of course, boy. Why do you stay? You could leave. Go back to England. You have no obligation to be here. William considered the question for a long moment. I stay because someone must bear witness. Someone must remember that these men were people, not just numbers in a chronicle. Someone must do the small kindnesses that remind us we are still human. He gestured to the tent behind them. I cannot save everyone. I cannot stop the war. But I can set a broken leg. I can sit with a dying boy. I can offer water to a prisoner. These are small things, but they are the things I can control. And you think that matters in the face of all this death? I think it is all that matters. William stood, his joints cracking. The great men make war. The great men win battles. The great men get remembered in songs. But the small kindnesses, the moments of mercy, the choices to see people as people instead of obstacles, those are what allow us to call ourselves human instead of beasts. He walked back into the tent, leaving Edmund and Richard alone with the night and their thoughts. Richard spoke quietly. I want to be like him when I am old. So do I, Edmund said, but I fear we are too much like ourselves to ever be that good. Then what do? We try anyway, and we fail, and we try again. That is all any of us can do. They sat together until the fire burned low and the camp grew quiet around them. Tomorrow would bring more death, more suffering, more impossible choices. But tonight they had kept a boy and a man alive. They had honored an old friendship. They had stayed human in the face of everything that tried to make them less. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. And in the wreckage of Agincourt, something had to be enough. The third day dawned sick and gray. Edmund woke to the sound of retching men emptying their stomachs outside their tents. The plague they called it, though the surgeons insisted it was flux from the poisoned water. The distinction meant nothing to the men dying from it. 40 soldiers had fallen ill by sunrise. By noon the number doubled. King Henry gave the order Edmund had been dreading. The army would march to Calais immediately. Anyone too sick to walk would be left behind with a token force to care for them. Everyone knew what that meant. The sick would die here on this field, breathing air thick with rot. Father William refused the order. Edmund found the old priest in the supply tent calmly packing medical supplies into saddlebags. Bernard lay nearby, delirious with fever, his broken leg swollen to twice its normal size. Henri sat against the tent wall, his young face pale with fear. William, what are you doing? Staying, obviously. The priest did not look up from his packing. Someone needs to tend the sick. It might as well be me. The king ordered all chaplains to march with the army. Then the king will have to march without me. William finally met Edmund's eyes. I did not survive 45 years of ministry to abandon dying men now. I am staying. That is final. Edmund felt something crack in his chest. You will die here. Probably, but I will die doing God's work, which is more than most men can say. William smiled, and it was the saddest smile Edmund had ever seen. I am 68 years old, Edmund. I am tired. I have seen enough death. If I am to see more, let it be while I am doing something useful. William, no arguments. My mind is made. The priest pressed a rosary into Edmund's hand. Give this to someone who needs it more than I do. I suspect you will find many such people before this is over. Edmund stared at the rosary. The beads were worn smooth from decades of prayer. I cannot let you do this. You cannot stop me. I am not yours to command. William's voice softened. Go, Edmund. Take your son and go. Live long enough to teach him that honor still matters, even when the world tries to convince you otherwise. Edmund wanted to argue, wanted to drag William to the march by force if necessary. But he knew the old priest. Once William had made a choice based on conscience, nothing would move him. What about Bernard Henri? Bernard will not survive the march. Not with his fever. Better he dies here with a friend than alone on the road. William moved to Henri, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. And this one has nowhere to go. His father is dead. His village is 300 miles away through enemy territory. He stays with me. Henri spoke in French, his voice breaking. William answered gently, then turned back to Edmund. He wants to help tend the sick. I told him yes. William, he is a boy. He is 17. You sent boys younger than him into battle yesterday. If he is old enough to die in war, he is old enough to choose how he spends whatever life remains to him. Edmund had no answer to that. Richard appeared in the tent entrance. Father Captain Blackwood is calling assembly. We have to go. Edmund looked at his son, then at William, then at the rosary in his hand. A choice stood before him, clear and terrible. March with the army and live. Stay with William and probably die. For the first time in his life, Edmund understood what courage actually meant. Not the courage to fight, which was just adrenaline and training, but the courage to choose the harder path when an easier one was right there beckoning. Richard, he said slowly, go tell Captain Blackwood that we are staying. His son's eyes widened. Father, that is desertion. They will hang us. Only if we survive long enough to be caught. And if this flux is as bad as I think it is, hanging will be the least of our concerns. Edmund handed the rosary back to William. Keep it. You will need it more than whoever I would have given it to. William's eyes filled with tears. Edmund, you do not have to do this. Yes, I do. Because you taught me 30 years ago at Rosebecki that we protect those who cannot protect themselves. You saved my life that day. Let me repay the debt. There is no debt between us. Then let me do this as a friend. They embraced two old warriors who had seen too much and somehow not enough. Richard stood frozen in the tent entrance, his face a mask of shock. Father, are you insane? We will die here. Possibly, probably. Edmund released William and turned to his son. But we will die doing something that matters. Is that not what you wanted, to find meaning in all this horror? I wanted to survive. I wanted to go home. And you can. I am not ordering you to stay, Richard. If you want to march with the army, go. I will not think less of you. Edmund met his son's eyes. But I am staying. This is where I am needed. This is where I can do something good amid all the evil we have done. Richard stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly he unbuckled his sword belt and set it aside. If you are staying, I am staying. Someone has to make sure you do not do anything stupid. Edmund felt pride and terror war in his chest. Richard, do not try to talk me out of it. You taught me that honor matters. You taught me to protect the weak. You taught me to be better than the world expects. Richard's voice was steady now, certain. Well, here are weak men who need protecting. Here is a chance to be better. I am not walking away from that. Father William smiled through his tears. Your father raised a good man. He raised a foolish one, but I suppose that is close enough. Captain Blackwood found them an hour later. His face was thunder. Hartley, what in God's name do you think you are doing? The army marches in 20 minutes. Then the army marches without us. We are staying to tend the sick. That is desertion. That is mercy. Call it what you will. Blackwood's hand went to his sword. I could kill you where you stand. You could try. Edmund's voice was calm. But you are down 40 fighting men already from the flux. Do you really want to spend time and energy executing two more? We are staying, Blackwood. Either accept it or waste arrows putting us down. The two men stared at each other. Finally, Blackwood's hand left his sword. You are a fool, Hartley, and you are raising your son to be a fool as well. Probably, but we will be fools with clear consciences. Blackwood turned to leave, then paused. For what it is worth, I respect what you are trying to do, even if I think it is suicide. He pulled a pouch from his belt and tossed it to Edmund. Medical supplies. Not much, but better than nothing. Try not to die too quickly. Then he was gone, and they heard the trumpets calling the army to march. Edmund, Richard, Father William, and 3 volunteer nuns formed the rear guard. 47 sick soldiers lay in various states of decline across 4 tents. Bernard de Valois drifted in and out of consciousness, his leg black with infection. Henri moved among the patients, offering water-changing bandages, doing what he could with hands that shook from fear and inexperience. The work was brutal. Men died despite their best efforts. Some quickly, their bodies giving up the fight. Others slowly over days crying for mothers and wives who would never know what happened to them. Edmund and Richard dug graves. Not the mass pits this time, but individual resting places. It took longer, required more effort. But Father William insisted. These men have names. They have families. They deserve to be buried as people, not as problems to be solved. So they dug, one grave at a time, and William said prayers over each. and slowly the number of sick dwindled. Not because they recovered, because they died. By the fifth day, only 12 remained alive. Bernard among them, somehow clinging to life despite the infection that should have killed him days ago. Edmund sat beside the French count's bedside, changing the bandages on his leg. The smell was indescribable, gangrene setting in deep. Bernard's eyes opened lucid for the first time in days. Edmund, I am here. My leg, it is gone, is it not? Edmund did not insult him with lies. The infection has spread past the knee. William says we need to amputate or the rot will kill you. Do you have the tools for amputation? We have a saw, we have fire to cauterize. We have leather for you to bite on. Edmund met his friend's eyes. It will hurt more than anything you have ever experienced, and you might die anyway, but it is your only chance. Bernard was quiet for a long time. If I live without the leg, I cannot fight, cannot ride, cannot do anything a noble is supposed to do. You could still be a father, a husband, a friend. In a world that values men only for what they can do in battle, I would be useless, a burden. Bernard's smile was bitter. Perhaps it is better to die here with some dignity intact. That is cowards' talk. No, it is realists' talk. I am 52 years old, Edmund. I have been fighting since I was 16. I am tired. If God is offering me a way out, maybe I should take it. Edmund gripped Bernard's hand. Your family paid 3,000 livres for your ransom. They beggar themselves for you, and you would spit on that sacrifice by choosing to die when you could live. I would spare them the burden of caring for a cripple. You would give them a corpse instead of a father. Is that the legacy you want to leave, that when things got hard you quit? Bernard's eyes filled with tears. I am afraid, Edmund, not of dying, of living diminished, of being less than I was. We are all less than we were. This war has taken pieces from all of us. Edmund squeezed his friend's hand. But we are still here, still breathing, still capable of love and laughter and all the things that make life worth living. Do not throw that away because you are afraid of being imperfect. Bernard stared at the tent ceiling for a long time. Finally, he nodded. Do it. Cut off the leg. I will try to survive. The amputation happened at dawn when the air was cool and Bernard had the most strength. Father William performed the surgery, his hands steady despite his age. Edmund and Richard held Bernard down while he screamed. Henri stood nearby praying in French tears streaming down his face. The saw bit through bone. The smell of burning flesh filled the tent as they cauterized the stump. Bernard passed out from pain halfway through, which was a mercy. When it was done, Father William sat back exhausted and blood-covered. He might live. The next 3 days will tell. He lived. 3 days later, Bernard woke with clear eyes and no fever. The infection had been cut away. His body, freed from the poison, began to heal. How do you feel? Edmund asked. Bernard looked at the space where his leg had been. Like I lost a fight with a very angry saw, but alive. Surprisingly alive. He met Edmund's eyes. Thank you. Thank William. He did the cutting. I will thank him too, but I am thanking you for convincing me to try. Bernard's voice was soft. I wanted to quit Edmund, and you would not let me. That took courage I did not have. You have it now. That is what matters. Over the next week, 9 more men died. 3 recovered. Bernard grew stronger each day, learning to balance without his leg, learning to navigate the world as a different man than he had been. Henri proved invaluable. The boy had a gift for nursing a gentleness that put dying men at ease. He learned English in fragments, picking up words from the patients, teaching them French in return. By the end of the second week, he could hold basic conversations. Richard spent most of his time with Henri, the 2 young men forming a friendship despite the language barrier and the fact that they had been trying to kill each other 2 weeks ago. Edmund watched them laugh together over some shared joke and felt something loosen in his chest. Maybe some good could come from this horror after all. Father William continued his ministry, tending to the sick, burying the dead, never resting. His energy seemed limitless, drawn from some deep well of faith that Edmund could not fathom. On the 15th day after Agincourt, the last patient either died or recovered. The field hospital closed. They had saved 6 men out of 47. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. They buried the last of the dead on a cold November morning. Father William said the prayers. Henri sang a song in French, something about going home to God. Richard and Edmund filled in the graves side by side while Bernard watched from where he sat propped against a tree. When it was done, they stood together, 5 men who had survived something that should have killed them. What now? Richard asked. Now we go home, Edmund said. Those of us who have homes to return to. Bernard spoke up. I received word yesterday, a messenger from my family. They have paid the ransom. I am free to leave. He paused. Though I do not know where I would go, I cannot return to military service. My estates are sold. I am a knight with no purpose. Father William smiled. Then perhaps you need a new purpose, such as, I am planning to establish a permanent hospital here, for soldiers wounded in future battles, for villagers who need care, for anyone who suffers. William's eyes were bright with vision. I am too old to run it alone. I need help. A man who understands soldiers, who has seen war, who knows what mercy costs. Bernard stared at him. You want me a cripple? I want a man who has suffered and chosen to live anyway. I want a man who understands that healing is harder than killing. I want you, Bernard, and if you will have the work. Bernard looked at Edmund, then at Richard, then at Henri. Finally, he nodded. Yes, I will help you build your hospital. It is better than anything else I had planned. Henri spoke up in halting English. I help too. Learn healing. Be doctor, maybe. William embraced the boy. You will make a fine doctor, Henri. I will teach you everything I know. Edmund felt tears sting his eyes. Out of all the death, all the horror, all the compromised choices, this moment of grace. 3 men who should have been enemies choosing instead to heal. We should go, he said quietly. Richard and I, we have been gone too long. Wait. William went into the tent and emerged with something wrapped in cloth. He pressed it into Edmund's hands. For you. Edmund unwrapped it. Inside was a simple wooden cross no bigger than his palm, carved with care and skill. I made it from a spear shaft, William explained, from one of the weapons left on the field. I wanted you to have something to remember, that even instruments of death can be transformed into symbols of hope. Edmund clutched the cross, unable to speak. William continued, You stayed when you could have left. You chose mercy when doctrine demanded cruelty. You saved lives when saving lives cost you everything you had built. That is heroism, Edmund. Not the kind they sing about, but the kind that actually matters. I did not feel like a hero. I felt like a fool. The two are often the same. William smiled. Go home. Teach your son what you have learned here. Teach him that the truest courage is not in killing, but in refusing to kill, when you have every reason and right to do so. Edmund embraced his old friend one last time. I will not see you again, will I? Probably not. I am old Edmund. This work will likely kill me, but it will kill me happy. William released him and turned to Richard. Take care of your father. He is braver than he knows. I will. They left at dawn, Edmund and Richard walking away from Agincourt with lighter packs and heavier hearts. Behind them, Father William, Bernard, and Henri began the work of building something new from the ruins of war. 6 months later, Edmund received a letter. It came from France, bearing William's seal. Edmund, it read in the priest's careful script, the hospital stands, 20 beds so far with plans for 50 more. Bernard runs the daily operations with surprising efficiency. Henri has proven himself invaluable learning medicine faster than I can teach it. We have treated 200 patients in 3 months. Soldiers from both sides, villagers, even a few children. I am writing to tell you that what we did mattered. The lives we saved have saved others in turn. Bernard married a local widow last month. Henri speaks English better than I do now and has begun training as a physician in earnest. The field of Agincourt, once soaked in death, now grows wheat. The farmers say the crop is the richest they have seen in years. Something about the soil. I do not know how many years I have left, but I know they will be good years. Years spent building instead of destroying. Years spent healing instead of hurting. Thank you for staying with me when you had every reason to leave. Thank you for showing me that honor still exists even in the darkest places. Give my love to Richard. Tell him he is a good man and he should be proud of that. Your friend always, William. Edmund read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and placed it in his strongbox alongside his father's signet ring and the wooden cross William had given him. Richard found him there staring at the box's contents. "News from France?" his son asked. "Good news for once. William's hospital thrives. Bernard has found a new purpose. Henri is becoming a doctor. I am glad. They deserve good endings." Edmund looked at his son. Richard was 23 now, a year older, and decades wiser than the boy who had ridden to Agincourt. He would never be innocent again. War had stolen that, but he was still good, still capable of mercy, still human despite everything that had tried to make him less. "What will you do now?" Edmund asked. "The king will call his banners again eventually. Will you answer?" Richard was quiet for a long time. "I do not know. I know I cannot go back to believing war is glorious. I know I cannot unsee what I saw. But I also know that if good men refuse to fight, then only bad men will shape the world." He looked at his father. "What should I do?" "I cannot tell you that. I can only tell you what I learned." Edmund picked up the wooden cross. "I learned that the measure of a man is not how well he kills, but what he protects when the killing is done. I learned that honor is not about winning. It is about what you refuse to compromise, even when compromising would be easier. And if I am called to war again, then go if you must, but go with eyes open. Go knowing that war is not glory. It is horror with a banner on top. And if you find yourself in that horror, look for the moments where you can choose mercy, choose compassion, choose to see the enemy as human even when doctrine says they are just obstacles to eliminate." Richard nodded slowly. "And if I fail, if the horror breaks me, then you let it break you. And then you put yourself back together piece by piece and you try again. That is all any of us can do." They sat together in comfortable silence, father and son, two men bound by blood and battle, and the knowledge that they had seen the worst of humanity and somehow not been destroyed by it. Outside, spring was coming to England. The fields were greening. Life was returning after winter's death. And somewhere in France, on a field where 10,000 men had died, a hospital stood. A monument to the idea that even in war's aftermath, healing was possible. Edmund thought about the boy Richard had watched die in the pursuit. The men Richard had mercy killed with shaking hands. The choices that had no good answers. The compromises that had cost pieces of his son's soul. Then he thought about Henri alive because they had refused to kill him. About Bernard alive because they had chosen amputation over execution. About the 6 soldiers who had recovered because Edmund and Richard had stayed when they could have left. The scales would never balance. The good would never outweigh the bad. But the good was still there, still real, still worth fighting for. "Come," Edmund said, standing and offering his hand to his son. "Your mother will be wondering where we are. And I promised her I would bring you home safely." "You did bring me home safely." "No, I brought you home changed, but alive. That will have to be enough." They walked out together, leaving the strongbox open behind them. Inside, the wooden cross caught the afternoon light, transforming a fragment of war into something that could almost be called beautiful. It was not much, it was not enough. But it was something. And after Agincourt, something was all anyone could hope for. The end. In the archives of a monastery in northern France, there exists a chronicle written in Father William's hand. It was discovered in 1847 during renovations hidden behind a loose stone. The entry for October 1415 reads, "I witnessed 10,000 dead at Agincourt. I witnessed systematic murder disguised as mercy. I witnessed looting cruelty and every sin man is capable of committing. But I also witnessed 3 men who refused to let war kill what was best in them. Sir Edmund Hartley, who stayed when he could have left. Richard Hartley, who chose compassion when cruelty would have been easier. And young Henri of Rouen, who chose to heal the men who had killed his father. These men will never be remembered in the great chronicles. No bards will sing of them. No kings will honor them. But they changed the world in ways the great men never could. They built a hospital that will outlive them. They saved lives that will save other lives. They proved that even in hell, humanity can survive. That is worth recording. That is worth remembering." The hospital Father William founded operated for 40 years, closing only in 1456 when the last of its founders had died. In those 4 decades, it treated an estimated 4,000 patients. The building itself was destroyed during the Wars of Religion in the 16th century, but the foundation stones remained. In 1998, archaeologists excavating the battlefield of Agincourt discovered those stones. Beneath them, they found the mass graves William and Edmund had dug, each body buried individually with care exactly as the chronicle described. They also found something else. A wooden cross buried with one of the soldiers, carved from a spear shaft, transformed from an instrument of death into a symbol of hope. It sits now in a museum in France labeled Origin Unknown, circa 1415. But we know its origin, we know its story, and we know that on a field where 10,000 men died in pursuit of glory, the only glory worth having was the kind no one would ever sing about. The glory of staying human when humanity cost everything. The glory of choosing mercy when mercy made no sense. The glory of three men who refused to let war win. That is the last lesson of Agincourt, and it is a lesson worth learning.